No wonder I'm sweating. Let's see if I can zoom in. How do I zoom in? See the -50? -47, -51, -53. That's 50 degrees below zero in Greenland. And I can tell by looking at this exactly when the Industrial Revolution occurred, because that's when we began to emit CO2. See the temperature going up, going up, going up. It's getting warmer. Now it's 45. Now it's in the 30s. Oh man, back down to the 40s. Now it's in the 30s. It's in the 30, 31, 30, 30. It's 30 degrees below zero. 30 degrees below zero. When is the ice going to melt? 30 degrees below zero. When did the Industrial Revolution begin? The temperature in Greenland is 30 degrees below zero, average. 30 below zero. Let's see when the Industrial Revolution occurred. Well, it really doesn't matter, because as of now, the temperature is still 31 degrees below zero. And at what temperature does ice melt? Does anybody know? Let's see if you can trust this data. What is this data? Temperature in central Greenland. Abstract. Greenland ice core records provide an exceptionally clear picture of many aspects of abrupt climate changes, and particularly of those associated with the Younger Dryas event, as reviewed here. Well-preserved annual layers can be counted confidently with only 1% errors for the age of the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,500 years before present. Temperature interpretation based on stable isotope analysis and ice accumulation data from the GISP2 Ice Core Central Greenland. Contributors Richard Alley, Pennsylvania State University. I came across a gentleman yesterday named McCormick, a professor of medieval history at Harvard. Medieval history. If there is an obscure document in the known records, a document that historians can reference for information, it ought to be Mr. McCormick. Mr. McCormick was all excited as he delivered his speech announcing the release of a white paper that he wrote, the most difficult paper he had ever written. The results of his collaboration with some physical scientists, such as scientists who study tree rings and scientists who study insects, maybe a scientist who studies paintings on caves, ancient cave paintings. And they're going to pool their knowledge and ask interesting questions about the climate 1,000 years ago and 500 years ago. And I noticed he talked on and on and on and never did really arrive at any point, never made a conclusion, except once, and that was purely by accident. And I was very upset by his presentation, very troubled. And I went and read most of his part of his paper. I glanced over his long paper. And he's going to try to use historical records together with tree ring data, and I learned a new word which I can't say, speleothems, which are formations in caves, formations of calcium carbonate left behind by dripping rainwater that seeps through rocks and drips into the cave and leaves behind the deposit. And you've probably seen stalactites and stalagmites. They're going to study all these things, you know, but basically at this point, all they've got is enough data to pose interesting questions that require more research. That was the gist of his paper. And he had some graphs which attempted supposedly to illustrate data, and his graphs were meaningless except for one thing. The one thing that I extracted from his graphs and his papers and his speech is he was trying to put forth the idea that the climate history of Europe over the past 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, all the way to the Roman era, during the Roman Empire, which started over 2,000 years ago. All he can say at this point is he's found some interesting questions that need more research. But at this point, everything is fuzzy, 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 fuzzy. That's his point. All the experts got together, they racked their brains, and the results are nothing but fuzzy, fuzzy, fuzzy. There are no conclusions, but we hope to have some conclusion soon. It'll take more study, which is more money, and they obviously have just given him some money, and his colleagues some money, and they obviously paid him to obfuscate, to lie, to cover up. This is a cover-up. McCormick, the historian at Harvard, McCormick, if you're listening, you are a fraud. You are a charlatan. McCormick, professor, Harvard, ancient history, you are a fraud. You're a sick bastard. You take money and tell lies. You're a sick bastard. Rot in hell. Because there is plenty of data that makes it very clear the climate history of the world, including Europe. It's not exactly precise. You can't count on a particular data point on a chart to be illustrative of the exact truth. But many charts that produce several warm periods and cold periods, warm periods and cold periods, and they basically overlap. They basically illustrate the same phenomena. There's no need for McCormick and his study group, except if your aim is to hide and obscure and confuse, to muddy the waters. And so I typed in just now, ice core Greenland. And it shows you, to your surprise, the ice core, this particular ice core, when the data is graphed, the graph does produce a hockey stick. But keep watching. The hockey stick becomes very small and obscure and is overwhelmed by the medieval warm period and the Roman climate optimum. And as you zoom out and look at the whole 10,000 years, you get a better picture of what climate has done, and you see at this point for sure that we are in a cold cooling period today. The past several thousand years is a period of cooling.